And I think that that's one thing that advice that I would have for parents is that, you know, trust your teachers. Trust your teachers to make good choices for your child in the classroom because parenting is really, really hard. Teaching is really, really hard. And I think that parents and teachers, they can certainly work harmoniously together to support a student.
You're listening to the smartsocial.com podcast. I'm your host, Josh Oakes. This is our District Talk segment where we interview district leaders to learn how they're keeping students safe on social media so those students can someday shine online. Now, let's get back to the interview.
I'm Michael Davies-Hughes, Superintendent of Schools for Humboldt County, located on the beautiful north coast of California. As a county office of education, we serve 17,500 students across 31 school districts and 15 charter schools.
Well, it's great to have you. I've got a series of questions. I'd love to dive into what you're doing in your community to not only keep students safe on social media, but to help them shine online. And I know there's a lot of nuance there, County Superintendent, but I would love to inspire other superintendents all over the country with some of your wisdom. So the first question I have for you here today is, what is your biggest accomplishment as a district over the past 6 to 24 months?
Well, Josh, let me start by saying that my accomplishments are the accomplishments of our amazing team. I have 350 staff who work tirelessly day in, day out to support the students in our county. I'm most proud of our focus on improving literacy, especially among our preschool through third grade populations. Early education is a focal point for us, so I'm most proud of that work.
Yeah, that's absolutely terrific. Now, let's go into the next question, which has to do with literacy because technology is here to stay. So that's really terrific. You're focusing on literacy. How are you using technology or resources to enhance student learning and engagement? But we can even dive into that literacy since that's a big focal point. How are you using tech in the classroom, at home, communication with parents to enhance that literacy?
Let me start by saying on this topic, Josh in particular, is that we are side by side with parents, with teachers as being learners. I think that people say that, students are ahead of us in terms of their ability to navigate these potentially turbulent waters of the use of technology as part of education. So I think that one of the things that we do well is that we encourage our staff, the staff that we support around the professional learning, to really listen to their students. In that, as learners, we're not only responsible for teaching our students, but we're responsible for teaching one another how to navigate these, complex, seemingly daily changing challenges that we have around technology. So I mentioned at the outset that our role as a county office is to support the districts and the charter schools in our county. And that means that we're a hub for resources and professional learning for our educators. And we see that technology is not something separate, not something to be considered in a siloed way, but rather really integrated into the work that we do, and especially around the area of literacy, because we know that our students are spending a great deal of time tuned in or engaged in with the use of technology. And so we want to make sure that we are empowering students to be able to use that technology to enhance their learning, especially around literacy. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about literacy and technology. What does that mean? How does it mean to be literate in a ever constantly changing technology world?
Yeah, let's actually double click on that right now if we want to use that internet analogy. I want to dive into, what does literacy mean for your district and how does that work? Whether you want to dive into like all the grades at once or walk us through how do you define awesome literacy for students?
Think big picture here, kind of the 30,000-foot view. What do we want students to know and understand by the time they graduate from high school? And then we backward map, what are the skills and the attributes that will help them get there. So our responsibility as a county office, and really as a county who are responsible for educating our youth, is to prepare our students for their preferred future. We know that preferred future is going to look vastly different for a kindergartner who's graduating high school than it looks right now. So it's not just about teaching content It's not just about teaching the knowledge part of, math and English and social science, but rather those what would be considered previously as soft skills, but they're really not soft at all. These are hard skills about how to problem solve, how to critically think about problems. I think that one of the things that really struck me when I went to a conference several years ago, there was an individual there that was his title was, and check this out, Josh. His title was the education evangelist for Google. So that was the title. His name was Jamie Kasser. And one of the things that he said is, we've been asking the wrong questions of our students over the years. Instead of asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which is, students respond, I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a lawyer. What we should be asking is, what problem in the world do you want to solve? It's a fundamentally different question and really gets students to be thinking about what is their place and what is their role in the world and what challenge do they want to take head on. Now, that involves more than just the content of the particular subject area, but really how to attack, sometimes very complex, very large issues that we have in the world, things like climate change, peace in the world. So those are the things where we can really inspire students to be thinking bigger than what's just inside themselves, what's just around their classroom environment or their school or their community, but rather the kind of this global presence. I say all of this to mean that that's kind of our responsibility is to help students kind of navigate these complex issues that come to them with the goal at the end that we feel confident that you have the tools necessary to go out into the world and be successful no matter what you choose.
Here's what I love that you just said. You're asking the students to set their dream goals and passions, and then you're going to help them navigate the best literacy, the best digital tools, the best everything to get there. But you're helping them dream big. And this is why I love this, because it gets into our next question. And we at Smart Social, to all of our listeners who know us so well, are really getting kids to set their career goals and all these ambitions so that they'll use social media like a vehicle. And I want to pause for just a second, County Superintendent. When we give students a vehicle, it's a Ferrari. For those of you listening right now, I'm holding up my cell phone. This is a Ferrari that goes 200 miles an hour. And if we just hand it to kids and we don't explain it to them how to drive it safely, they will just do donuts in their parents' front lawn, right? And they'll just say, wow, this thing goes fast. I'm going to mess around with it. Rather than saying this device helps you get here and there. Here's how to set boundaries around it. And those vehicles, we understand, if you teach them how to drive safely under the speed limit, both hands on the wheels, no matter what country we're in, there are responsible driving practices. When they know how to use that vehicle, they're less inclined to use it in a negative way. And I love what you just said is, what are you going, let's set big goals. And then we're going to teach you how to get there, whether it's literacy, digital tools, and everything else. Let's dive into my next question for you. What advice do you have for school districts, for other districts that might deal with social media issues that could originate on a social media app? Let's think TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, but then creates a very real problem on one of your campuses.
First of all, let me say, you know, all due respect to our assistant principals out there or deans of students in our secondary schools that deal with this on a daily basis. I know this because I was one of them. And oh, it's so difficult. It's one thing to be able to deal with issues that come up in the school where you have some locus of control of what's going on. But when we see things that are happening outside of school, especially on social media, that then get brought into the school environment, it just increases the complexity, makes it very difficult for school teachers, administrators, and other school staff to kind of untangle all of these things because there's so many people that are usually involved, right? So when we think about social media, the whole word, like social, we're talking about multiple individuals usually. And when it's something that's negative, it can really proliferate because there are no boundaries essentially in how this information is shared. Let me give you an example. Is that I was at a conference about a month ago, and I got a call from one of my assistants saying, "Hey, we got a situation where a student came up to a teacher and said this and this happened on social media, and there were some threats that were made, and now the police is involved, and the parents are calling, and where do we go from here?" There's no easy answer for that. However, what we want to make sure is that we've got to kind of backtrack and think about the why of students using social media. So rather than saying, hey, as a teacher, as an administrator, instructing students that, social media, it's not a good thing, it's banned. Whatever happens outside of school, you cannot bring it into school. We need to listen to our students and understand the why behind their use of social media. Once we understand the why behind their use, we can have a meaningful conversation about how we can help them navigate a healthy way of using that social media so that it does not quickly devolve into something that is very negative. In other words, oftentimes these larger issues start with a very small action or a very small circumstance, like one student saying something that may be negative, but maybe it's misunderstood by the person on the other side. And then, someone else chimes in and pretty soon it kind of gets out of control. So how can a teacher, how can a school staff member be able to tell a student, look, here are some red flags when you're on social media, when you know that these kinds of things are showing up or these kinds of comments are being made, it's probably best if you step away, or it's probably best if you turn the conversation in a different direction. So, really, again, Josh, it goes back to what we talked about earlier is how can we ensure that we're empowering students to really take control over their presence on social media so that it doesn't become an issue. And when it does become an issue that finds its way into the school, that's a teachable moment. That's an opportunity not only to address, the issue itself in terms of having to deal with the consequences of poor choices, but rather that teachable moment of, okay, next time, how can you do this differently so we don't end up in the principal's office?
I love where you're going with that. Actually, let's jump on the other side of it. So we've talked a little bit about issues that might occur online that create a very real problem on campus. Well, let's talk about the positive side of it. Can you provide an example or two of how your students may have used their social media in a positive or productive way that may have benefited themselves or maybe their community or even their future career?
One of the privileges that we have here in the county office is we have a community outreach and engagement department. So through the communications center, and we're outreaching to districts and charter schools that we serve and saying, hey, what are some great things that are going on in your schools right now in terms of things the students are doing? And how can we support you in that? So I can tell you that we've had examples of students who have created content that's pushed out on our social media channels, highlighting the ways in which they're making a positive impact in their community, whether it be a beach cleanup or attending a community event where they're providing food for foster and homeless youth, or if they have some ideas about career and college opportunities or shortcuts to be able to navigate how to fill out a FAFSA or whatever it might be. When we see students pushing that out rather than adults, we actually see the engagement increasing. And not just for students, interestingly enough, but also for the families. And getting families engaged in schools is one of the biggest challenges that we have, like meaningful engagement. And so one of the ways we can do that is by making sure that we're driving student created content as opposed to adults again on screen, giving sound bites.
I love what you just said. Drive student created content instead of just adults. Absolutely brilliant. I think there's a huge future there with what you just said. Now, let's dive into the next. I'd love some more wisdom from you. What suggestions do you have for parents to encourage their kids to use technology in a positive way, both in the classroom and at home?
First of all, the lesson that I have to teach my kids is I have 3 children. Listen to your teacher. I I provide a lot of trust because I've grown up. My mother was a teacher. My brother was a teacher. My wife is a teacher. So, I understand how valuable and respected teachers can be and should be. And I really trust what they do in the classrooms. And I think that that's one thing, that advice that I would have for parents is that, you know, trust your teachers. Trust your teachers to make good choices for your child in the classroom, because parenting is really, really hard. Teaching is really, really hard. And I think that parents and teachers, they can certainly work harmoniously together to support a student. And where we see problems is when the parents and the teacher are really kind of not aligned in the way in which they're supporting their child, especially around social media. Listen, I've been at home and have had those arguments with my kids about spending too much time online, and go outside and enjoy this beautiful weather. Get off that app, and whoa, what was that cuss word that I had heard on TikTok? That's it. Let's shut that thing down. What we need to do, and what advice I would give to parents, is to take the time to talk to your kids again about the why behind their presence on social media or the use of certain apps. What need is it satisfying? And then explore other healthy possibilities that can help meet that need for the child. So it's about putting parameters, putting borders around the use of social media, but not in such a restrictive way that students are like raccoons. They're opportunistic. They're going to find a way of making something happen if they want. So let's make sure, yes, that there are parameters around the use of social media and technology, but let's not make that so restrictive that they are going to try to find maybe a dishonest way of being able to work outside of those boundaries. So, as a parent, you can kind of control that outside of school. Uh, Inside the classroom, again, I think that it's a matter of ensuring that if a teacher feels that there's an issue with a child's use of social media, or that the student is sharing something with the teacher about the use of social media that's maybe not positive and not healthy, is that there's that communication between the school and the parents, and not in a negative way, but just kind of checking in, because we know that, there's a mental health crisis. So, whatever you want to use, and I'm saying that not as a superlative, but as a reality, that we have this issue for students around mental health. It's more important than ever, especially in a post COVID environment where students didn't really have the opportunities to come together in a social environment in the same way. It's very important for families, parents and guardians, and teachers to be communicating on a regular basis, especially when they see things either at home that affect school, or something at school that may affect them.
Yeah, all great points. My next question for you is, what are your suggestions for other school districts to hit on something that you brought up earlier? How do other districts, you can teach us a couple tips that have worked, or maybe some failures that you have, or suggestions. What do you tell other districts about increasing parent engagement? And a little follow-up question, I hate to do this, but are there any specific channels or events that get the biggest turnout, the biggest engagement? What's working well for you that we could inspire other school districts and communities?
There are no secrets on this one, really, Josh. I will say things that have worked uh, time and time again. When you have the opportunity to combine meetings so that you're not having these one-off meetings for parents, including food,
Mhm.
right? Food is a big draw because parents have, they have busy lives. And if you're asking parents, for example, to come to a district meeting to provide input regarding their school plan or their district plan, I mean, that's not going to necessarily bring the biggest draw, you know, when there are so many other things that they could be doing. But we know that their input into how a district or a school writes their plan is really important about how we serve students. So ensuring that there's an opportunity for student performance, or somehow students to be involved in that meeting in some way. We talked earlier about, students pushing out content. It can be the same way when we want to try to bring uh, parents into a meeting that we need their input on. For younger students, that may look like a student performance. Maybe it's a little play, and then you have the meeting, the business part of it right after that play. Or Maybe it's them doing some kind of singing or some other student performance. And for the older students, perhaps you're combining some kind of student competition or some kind of student event, and then bringing parents in that way. So it is hard to engage parents, but I think the other key to this is that individual relationship with the teacher has with the parent. So the teacher can leverage that, teacher, administrator, staff member can leverage that relationship when they need help. So if you're only calling home when there are problems for the child, then when that phone rings and the parent looks at the caller ID and says, and sees ABC elementary school or middle school, instead of that, that kind of sinking feeling of dread, if there has been that kind of proactive call when good things are going on for the child, then they're more likely to be open to doing a favor for the teacher when the teacher wants them to be involved in something that at their school. So I think it all comes down to relationships there, Josh.
I like your tips and suggestions. It is a difficult problem. How do we engage each other and have a close knit communication while also managing those expectations? I love your ideas. And then here's the key takeaway that I have that I think our listeners will really like: combining those meetings. You got a PTA meeting? Let's throw something else in the end of it and stuff like that, or whatever those are. Combining them, I think that's brilliant. They want to come for this, and I want to be careful how I say this. The old bait and switch. You're here for here, but while I've got you as a captive audience, let's do 5-minute meeting about this, which I absolutely love, and I think parents appreciate that. They want to come out once and stay another 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Here's what I'd like to ask you next. What is your single biggest social media concern for the future?
I'll admit that I've lost some sleep over this question or thinking about this question. I am concerned about this monopolizing influence of, the social media giants who exploit the addictive aspects of the content they produce and how this can exacerbate that, social emotional well-being and mental health of students that we talked about.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about students being able to think for themselves and think critically and independently rather than depending on what is being pushed out in those social media environments. And so, as I mentioned at the outset, one of the things that we're responsible for is making sure that students are prepared for their preferred future. And if we are dictating that future, and when I say we, I mean big we, and we're dictating that future through content that we know or means that we know students are going to latch onto because they're addictive. And then we channel that creativity and ingenuity that students have, not even channel it, we shut it down because we're pushing out all the content. We're not allowing them to be able to explore and create themselves. That's a pretty sad state of affairs. And that's something that, I'm really concerned about.
Yeah, you just brought up a really good point. I've seen this just this week alone. In the last 5 days, I've seen this twice online. And I like what you said. If we're pushing so much content that it changes the student's future, I would argue that it steals their future, right? If we're on TikTok so much, and TikTok's in the news a lot, no offense to anybody that works at TikTok, we don't get paid by big data, but we do allow parents to know the good and the bad. And every vehicle, even a Ferrari, for those of you listening, I'm holding up my phone. There are pros and cons to every device we give kids, and there are pros. There are tools if we use them carefully. But I've been seeing this online, county superintendent, lately. I just saw this from a former executive at Facebook who left, who's now a big investor. He said, one of my kids started not doing so well in school, had behavioral problems, and the doctor said, we can put him on meds and do all this stuff. And he said, you know what? Let's take the iPad away for a month. Let's try this. And started to take away some of the things the kid had access to at a young age. And yes, there was a lot of anger from the kid for the first week. And then all of a sudden, grades went up, everything went up. And all of a sudden, these devices that can steal kids from their future or their current classroom engagement, as you're saying, right? We want to increase literacy. We want to do this and this. We need a focused child, many would argue, a child that can sit there in class and do great things. And I'm hearing from another mom saying, in the car, we're no longer allowing our kid to they have to read books. Okay, what books are we going to take? And you have to look outside. And there's a 1 week of the kid hates the mom. And then all of a sudden now there's conversations where the kid goes, can we take that book on this trip? Can we do that? And so I agree with your biggest concern, because I do think that that is going to rob their future. I have one last question for you. And before we do that, I want to thank all of the school districts that are working with us right now to allow Smart Social to host these engagement events for their parents, so that we can keep kids safe on social media, so we can shine online. To all of our partners that are listening right now, stay tuned. We have a new incredible dashboard. It's a teen summit where teens teach. And we actually have I'm looking over here, what students think about social media challenges. We have another one called What Students Think About Snapchat, what students wish parents knew about TikTok. And we have a few other ones. I'll just peruse them real quick. So to all of our partners, stay tuned for the Teen Summit. What students think about YouTube and social media. It's a student video all about video addiction, and then screen time struggles from real teens on how to navigate those. Thank you to our many districts that are using our resources, both in the classroom, at home, real teens, real psychologists, real parents, adding value. We want to thank everybody for doing that. Okay, County Superintendent, final question I have for you, and thank you for your time here today. So valuable to hear from you. I think you have some really good tips. Let's talk about the big elephant in the room. I ask everybody this question. How is your school district approaching AI tools like ChatGPT?
Yeah, thank you. I have a podcast as well, and I invited one of our district high school teachers, English teachers, to talk about this topic and how he is using AI in the classroom. I would say that teachers are very creative, and honestly, when I see the way in which teachers, not all teachers, but many of our teachers are not turning away from AI, but really and chat things like tools like ChatGPT, and not turning away from them, but rather leaning in and thinking, wow, how can we use this as a teaching tool, another teaching tool in our repertoire, as opposed to, no, you cannot use this ChatGPT. You cannot use AI tools because they're distracting from the classroom environment. They're distracting from, the teaching opportunities. Josh, some of the ways that I've seen this being used, and I mentioned this English teacher, he was using it to have Chat GPT be able to provide students with tools for doing a critical analysis of a certain piece of literature. So maybe that first draft, if the students were having some difficulties in kind of getting the juices flowing in terms of their writing, then they could use Chat GPT to be able to provide them with some prompts or some ideas to frame their writing. And then the students put in that content and their own voice into that. But without that little nudge of using the Chat GPT, the students may have been at a standstill in terms of how to move forward. So again, it's making sure that we're looking at ways that we can use these kinds of tools as opportunities to enhance what is going on in the classroom rather than detract from what is going on in the classroom. And there are just small ways in which you can do that. In that way, we're also validating for students that there's not a good and a bad when it comes to these kinds of tools. There is a useful way and a not useful way of being able to use them. So there are choices, and it's helping students see, hey, if I make this choice in how I use these AI tools versus this choice, this is what it's going to give me. This is the consequence. And so, those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing going on in the classroom, the ways in which teachers, and quite frankly, with around professional development, I mentioned that we provide professional development. We are seeing that professional development is more and more utilizing AI tools to be able to enhance the experience for participants who are coming to those professional development opportunities.
That's awesome. Couldn't agree more with you. Such a great tool. County Superintendent, I want to thank you for coming out here today. To all of our listeners, thanks so much for supporting us. As over the last 11 years, Smart Social has reached millions of people As many of our listeners know, I used to be one of the top 5 social media safety speakers in the country, traversing 29 states here in the United States, teaching 250,000 students how to shine online so that they can someday get a great job, career, internship, college, everything else, using these tools in a positive way. Parents, I do want you to know the number one safety app in the world is that rich dialogue you have with your kids. That means that AI or ChatGPT or Microsoft and Google will not wake up at 3 a.m. and alert you where your kids are at. That's something only your gut will do. And we want you to have that rich dialogue working with teachers, with the school district, and with your students to make sure that we're setting big goals for them so they can someday shine online and shine in person to be that resilient, amazing kid who's employable and doing great things. That's one of our dreams for your family here at Smart Social. And it's going to take a little bit of work, unfortunately, but we have dialogue starters for you and everything else. Thank you so much to all of our listeners, all of our partners, and everybody out there who's helping us to keep kids safe so they can shine online. As the title of my book says, let's remember to keep it light, bright, and polite because our kids are watching what we're doing online. We'll see all of you on the next episode. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to our smartsocial.com podcast. I'm your host, Josh Oakes. This was our District Talk segment where we interview school district leaders to learn how they're keeping students safe on social media so those students can someday launch into their future by shining online. This episode was brought to you by our smartsocial.com VIP program. It's called the Very Informed Parent Program, which helps you engage your students with teen-led video lessons. Stay one step ahead with our premium parent newsletter and discover hidden features on trending apps on teens' phones and our 54 plus live parent and student-friendly events every single year. You can click on the link below to chat with one of our team members if you want a free pass to our VIP program to support your community with our smartsocial.com resources. And if you're a district leader who has a success story, we would love to feature you on a future episode. You can click the link below to reach out. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a great day.